Our gospel reading is found in the gospel according to Matthew, beginning with in chapter 15 and verse 21. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed immediately. Let's pray. Lord, we are thankful for this word and for those who have passed it along to us. And now as we receive it on this day, may we hear in it a word that is to us, for us, on this day from you. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you. Amen. Pronouns. I want to begin by calling upon us as a collection of people to get the pronouns right. Now, I'm not talking about those which relate to preferred gender pronouns, which are a matter of our day. I have great confidence that we will get those right, even if it takes a little time. As an act of compassion and justice, we will learn to call all of God's children and speak to them in the manner in which they want to be spoken to. I want to talk about the other pronoun issue of our day. You know what I'm talking about, right? Maybe not. I'm going to build some suspense and let it linger there for a minute. I'm going to take a side trip, and I promise you it's going to be a short side trip. An interesting thing happened this past summer at camp, my last summer there, and actually it's been going on for a while. The 20-something staff members and even the older teenage campers take on a different tone when they're speaking to me about technology. Most of the time, they speak to me like normal human beings speak to other normal human beings. But something changes when they talk to me about technology. They begin to speak very slowly. They have this sympathetic look in their eyes, as if to say, "I know this is hard for you to comprehend, but I'm going to help you understand it." They take on the tone of a second grade teacher speaking to a child struggling with the lesson of the day. And then when they're desperate for someone to use the camera on their phone to take a picture of them and their friends, and I'm all that's left, they'll look at me with a kind of asking a question, "Can you handle this? Can you correctly use your big Neanderthal thumb, press this button on my phone so that I can post my picture on Instagram?" I like to mess with them and say, "What's Instagram?" I like to watch their young, innocent, unwrinkled faces go aghast at the prospect that there's some dinosaur roaming the earth that doesn't use Instagram. to be fair to them, they aren't wrong. And some of the struggles that I have, maybe you join with me in this, in dealing with the ever-dynamic, ever-changing world of technology. But as I would remind them, I do know how to use the World Wide Web. I do know how to Google. So I did some Googling to make sure I had my terms correct in describing the pronoun issue of our day. The problem is this simple: when we are considering the challenges that face our planet, our country, and we consider who are the impediments to addressing those challenges, we have a rather long list of what grammar persons would call personal pronouns to choose from. And when speaking of the hindrances toward making progress, we seem more comfortable with the pronouns they and them, as opposed to we and us. That is the pronoun problem our gospel passage speaks to, and it comes, I believe, with the unspoken demand that we hear this text as a word to us. We'll worry about them on another day. In 2022, Marvin McNichol published a book whose title asked a provocative question of its readers: where have all the prophets gone? Now, he was not wondering out loud about how to locate wild-eyed street preachers proclaiming the imminent end of the world. Those are pretty easy to find. He was, if I understand his intent, and even if it wasn't his intent, it is my intent this morning to ask about voices. Voices, as a rule, are plentiful. I have some which speak within my own head. I haven't started carrying on conversations with them yet, but if I do, I'll notify somebody on the right committee about that development. But there are other voices. Most of us hear them from time to time. There are voices from our past. For good or ill, there are voices which become internalized. Some of them are voices of light, encouraging us, as they always did, to live out of our highest and best selves. There are also voices speaking to us out of the darkness, assuring us, as they always did, that we will fail, if not now, soon. There are voices which speak to us out of the light, imploring us to embrace our freedom as God's beloved, to be light and life and love in this world. And there are voices, again, coming out of the darkness, calling us to live within the suffocating confines of fear and shame. There are voices outside of us as well. Voices speaking at varying degrees of volume, speaking on various subjects, but all quite certain that their voice should be heard above all others. They tell us what to buy, who to be, what we lack, and what we need to purchase in order to be made complete. There are voices everywhere we turn with something to say, but where are the voices of the prophets? Where are the voices who speak to us when we become stuck somewhere as people, stuck somewhere as faith communities, stuck somewhere as nations? Many of us speak about, and I spoke just a couple of weeks ago about the divide in our country. Let me assure you that I do not believe we are doomed by that divide, but we are stuck in that divide. And where are the voices which will call us out of that stagnation? Where are the voices which will spark our imaginations toward a way forward which we just haven't imagined yet? Where are the voices who can speak us out into the light when we think we know it all? When we think that what we see is all that there is to see. When we think that there is nothing much left for us to do which we haven't already done. And when we begin to believe that there is nothing left for us to become. Where are the voices that call us out of that lethargy? Where are those voices? Where are the voices of the prophets? Who will stand on the street corner, not announcing the end of the world, but reminding us that life goes on and that we are always presented with choices about how to live the rest of it? Now, no one would blame us if we strolled in here today, did our usual things, took our usual places, participated in our usual practices, and then opened up the Gospels as we usually do and expected that if we were to encounter a prophetic word, it would come from Jesus. Who would blame us, right? Jesus, our hero, the one we love, the one we sing about, the one we attempt to emulate as best that we can. So we have strolled in here, we've taken our places, we have participated in our usual practices, and we have opened up the Gospels as we usually do, and lo and behold, we have in fact encountered a prophet, but the prophet is not Jesus. The prophet is a woman whose name we do not know. The prophet is a grief-stricken, broken-hearted, desperate mother who is willing to do anything if it will relieve her daughter's pain. The prophet is a woman willing to suffer embarrassment, public humiliation, and rejection if it opens up the slightest possibility that her child will be healed. Well, if we were awake during the reading of the gospel lesson this morning, and I'm not implying that anybody wasn't, we are immediately challenged by it. I hope we are. I hope we're left asking the question, who is this Jesus in this story? The Jesus of this story encounters a Canaanite, a foreign woman whose daughter is, in the language of the text, tormented by a demon. And it seems like the natural plea of a parent whose child is suffering. We should take a moment here. Take a moment just to imagine for just a second what we would imagine Jesus' response to her to be. Imagine that just for a moment. What we will discover is that her request, which turned into a voice of prophecy, pushed Jesus and his followers into some reconsideration. It would force them to reconsider the boundaries of their movement. How far would it go? It would force them to reconsider the inclusivity of their mission. Who all would be in the circle? It would force them to reconsider just how much opposition they were willing to face. And this is the question that God's people have to ask themselves. How much opposition were they willing to face? Were they willing to align themselves with outsiders and become outsiders themselves? Jesus' initial response to her request was silence. He said nothing. Okay, not what we would expect, but maybe things will get better, right? His silence, however, is followed by a request of the disciples to get this, send her away. She was shouting and making noise and becoming a disturbance. Can't have that. But isn't it true that most of the movements of the Spirit, most of the shifts in our existence which lead to new life, they begin with a disturbance? Illness disturbs us. Grief disturbs us. Failure disturbs us. Our own human inconsistencies disturb us. People we don't understand disturb us. Confrontation with a task that is too big and too difficult, it disturbs us. Jesus' followers were disturbed, and they asked that Jesus send the disturbance away. Well, we might imagine that this is where Jesus starts acting like Jesus. This is where Jesus starts acting like our Jesus. This is where Jesus extends compassion to the woman and then sits down those blockheaded disciples and gets them right. Seems to me like the disciples need to be gotten right. Instead, we get a response from Jesus which is nothing less than shocking. If we were awake when the gospel lesson was read, and I'm not suggesting anyone wasn't, his response is shocking. He suggests that there are limits to how far he will reach. There are boundaries he will not cross. Boundaries which define some as insiders and some as outsiders. And in the declaration that he had come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel was the implication that he had not come for this woman. And he had not come for her broken child. Who is this Jesus? I know there is something in us which wants to defend him or to explain this away in some manner which is more palatable, but I would suggest that we be courageous enough to look at it. Look at it and see clearly. This is what it looks like when religion builds walls instead of tearing them down. Those who need help and healing get left on the outside. This is what it looks like. Go ahead and see what it looks like when religion creates division instead of creating pathways toward unity. It isn't easy to see, but let's see it. In this prophetic woman pleading for help. This gritty and determined mother, however, stayed. And that has always been, in this story, the thing that has grabbed me. In the midst of that humiliation, that embarrassment, those voices which wished to send her away, she stayed and she stood there. What an important message for you and for me. When you're trying to do a thing which is right, when you're trying to do a thing which is just, when you're trying to open up doors which have been closed for too long. Right here we have a patron saint. Mission, Peace, and Justice, this is your patron saint. All of you who are out there in this community trying to lift up light and love and compassion as the path to walk. All of you who are out there calling for fair and safe elections in this time. This is our patron saint. Keep staying and keep standing there. The conversation, though, goes from difficult to impossible when Jesus added insult to injury and he said, "Is it not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs?" And still she stayed. And still she stood. If it's right, if it's just, if it will open doors, keep staying, keep standing. And then she, still staying and still standing, said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs from their master's table." Now, I don't know if she was being witty. I don't think that she was. I think that she was revealing the depths of her desperation. But something happened. The text is brief, it is short, it doesn't tell us what happened. It doesn't tell us about what internal conversations Jesus might have been having with himself. But Jesus' resistance was broken down. He commended her for her faith, and he healed her daughter. But if we want a sense of the magnitude of what we just witnessed in this gospel text, we need to read forward in Matthew's account. If we were to read from here, we would read that Jesus left there and went up along the Sea of Galilee. Once there, he taught the multitudes, and he healed the lame, the blind, the cripple, and the mute. And then Matthew summarizes the response of the people by saying they praised the God of Israel. If this were only a gathering of Israelites, this designation would not have been necessary. And it doesn't take much of a leap at all to assume that this crowd was a newly diverse crowd, including not only those lost sheep of the house of Israel, but now others who had been on the outside looking in. This moment with this desperate mother and her demon-stricken daughter may well have been the moment when the walls crumbled, when the doors opened, when the mission expanded and the circle grew larger. The time was right. She stayed. She stood until the time was right. I know that this image of Jesus and this encounter with this woman brings some discomfort. I've preached on it dozens of times in my ministry, and I never open it up without discomfort. But isn't there also comfort to be found if Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, could grow, could evolve, could become, then what sort of hope does that lift up for you and for me and for our world? What sort of possibilities does that spur in the imaginations of God's people of what can still be? We aren't doomed. Perhaps we're just stuck. The gospel invites us today to follow a Jesus who let the Spirit take him to places he never imagined he would go, called there by a broken-hearted mother. The gospel invites us today to follow a Jesus who went out to people he never imagined he could or should reach. The gospel today invites us to follow a Jesus who stepped out of his circle, even if that meant becoming an outsider himself. This cross, which stands not only in the center of our worship space, but in the center of worship space where Christians meet around the world. That is not a symbol of an angry God whose anger could not be appeased, shy of the shedding of innocent blood. That is a symbol of love so profound, love so willing to expand the circle and bring those outside in, that he became an outsider himself. That's what that cross means. The prophet of this story, well, it turned out to be a mother with a sick daughter who stayed, who stood, and who spoke her truth. Where have all the prophets gone? I think maybe they haven't gone anywhere. We just got to learn to listen to them. Who are the voices who can call us out of the places where we become stuck? Perhaps we should listen to the voices of those who have been pushed to the fringes and then beyond. Perhaps we should listen to those who are oppressed, whose humanity is denigrated by a cruel world. Perhaps we should listen to those who have tears of pain on their faces and the weight of broken dreams on their backs. Perhaps we should hear their voices. We should listen to these prophets not simply that we might be doers of good, but because they are the voices which can shine light on what the world should be, what it can be, and what it will be when the will of God is done on earth as it is in heaven. May we go from here with hearts and ears open, that we might hear the voices of the prophets, because they haven't gone anywhere.